He said a child was never in his plans, but 2 years later, the Millionaire CEO froze on a cafe terrace, as 3 little girls with his blue eyes looked straight at him. Austin Reed had always lived by a strict blueprint: rise early, dominate the boardroom, make calculated choices, eliminate unpredictable variables, and never, under any circumstances, allow emotions to interfere with ambition. This philosophy had carried him from a cramped childhood apartment to the top floor of the city's most coveted skyscraper. It shaped the way he spoke, the way he dressed, the way he considered relationships as strategically as mergers. So when Emma stood in front of him that day, with her soft blonde hair tucked behind her ear and her hopeful blue eyes searching his face for reassurance, he didn't see love or partnership or possibility. He saw complication. He saw a detour from the future he had painstakingly crafted. And instead of hesitation or empathy, the words that left his mouth were cold and final. A child was never in my plans. The moment he said it, the air shifted. Emma didn't gasp or argue or crumble. Her reaction was far quieter, far more devastating. He watched the light drain from her eyes, not all at once, but slowly, like a candle flickering under wind until it surrendered. She had always been the type of person whose emotions lived openly on her face. When she laughed, her whole expression glowed. When she worried, her brows pinched with gentle sincerity. But now her features smoothed into something unreadable, a mask so still that Austin felt an unexpected ripple of discomfort. She wrapped her arms around herself in a faint, protective gesture, as if trying to hold together something fragile inside her. He expected her to demand an explanation or plead for some acknowledgement of what they had shared. Instead, she simply nodded. It was a small, decisive movement, but it carried a finality that unsettled him. She didn't ask him why he suddenly treated their relationship as an inconvenience. She didn't ask whether he cared. She didn't even let her disappointment fully show. She just breathed out slowly, as though releasing the last piece of hope she had held onto, and said quietly, "I understand." The simplicity of her response unnerved him, more than any outburst would have. It felt like she was stepping back from him not just physically, but emotionally, cutting a thread he hadn't realized had tethered them. She turned, gathering her purse with careful movements that contrasted sharply with the storm he expected to see. He watched her walk toward the door with a grace that made something inside him tighten inexplicably. He almost called after her, not to take back his words, but because the silence between them felt strangely heavy. But pride, habit, and fear all merged into a single rigid force that kept him motionless. When the door closed behind her, it didn't slam or echo dramatically. It clicked softly, a sound so gentle he almost missed it. Yet it reverberated through him in a way he didn't know how to name. He stared at the closed door for several seconds, confused by the sudden hollowness in the room, the unsettling sense that something significant had just slipped through his fingers. He shook it off quickly, telling himself he had done the rational thing, the responsible thing. A child would have disrupted everything: his schedule, his reputation, his goals. He convinced himself that the unease he felt was nothing more than temporary discomfort. But the following days betrayed him. He found himself replaying the moment Emma walked away, the quiet dignity in her posture, the sadness she tried so hard to hide. He told himself it was simply guilt, an emotional hangover that would fade. Yet every time he stayed late at the office, every time he returned to his immaculate penthouse, every time he found himself surrounded by luxury but haunted by an inexplicable emptiness, that image resurfaced. Emma leaving. Emma not fighting. Emma accepting his dismissal as if she had expected nothing else. He thought he had closed a door. He didn't realize it was the beginning of a story he would spend years trying to understand. Emma left the city the very next morning, before the sun had fully risen and before she had a chance to second-guess the decision that felt both heartbreaking and necessary. She packed her belongings quietly, moving through the small apartment that still smelled faintly of Austin's cologne, trying not to think about how many memories lingered in the air. The early light spilled across the floor in soft stripes, illuminating the space where she and Austin had once made breakfast together, where he had kissed her goodnight, where she had allowed herself to believe they were building something real. Now, as she folded her last sweater into a suitcase that felt too small for the weight of her emotions, she realized how much of her life, her dreams, her expectations, her plans, had revolved around a man who had never intended to stay. The bus ride to the neighboring state felt endless. Emma sat pressed against the cool window, her hand resting unconsciously on her stomach even before she fully accepted what she already knew deep inside. The realization that she was pregnant hadn't arrived through a dramatic moment or a sudden revelation. It had come quietly, like a whisper settling in her chest, a truth she had not wanted to face until now. With each mile that carried her farther from Austin, the certainty grew heavier. Her body felt different, fragile in a way she'd never experienced. Her emotions swung between fear and awe, panic and a fierce, protective warmth she had no words for yet. When she finally stepped off the bus in a small town she had once visited as a child, the air smelled of pine and fresh earth. The simplicity of the place soothed her in a way she didn't expect. It was slower, quieter, far removed from the skyscrapers and relentless energy of the city. She found a modest apartment above a bakery whose windows were always fogged from the heat of fresh bread, and despite the cramped rooms and creaky floors, she felt something she hadn't felt in months: safety. Her pregnancy, however, was far from gentle. She spent long nights curled on the bathroom floor, fighting waves of nausea so strong they left her trembling. Some mornings she couldn't stand without dizziness, and the loneliness gnawed at her during the hours the world slept. Yet every doctor's appointment reminded her what she was fighting for. During the first ultrasound, the image on the screen startled her so deeply she gasped aloud. Not one heartbeat. 3. The doctor repeated the word triplets with a combination of wonder and caution, explaining all the risks, the difficulties, the challenges that lay ahead. But Emma barely heard the words. She was too overwhelmed by the sound of 3 fluttering rhythms echoing through the dim room like tiny drums announcing a new purpose for her life. Carrying 3 babies proved even more difficult than she imagined. She became exhausted easily, often needing to sit after just a few steps. Her back ached constantly, her ankles swelled, and her emotions rose and crashed unpredictably. Money became a pressing concern as medical bills accumulated, and she worked as much as she safely could, taking freelance design jobs from her small desk near the window that overlooked the bakery's rooftop. Each sketch, each digital illustration funded another week of vitamins, another checkup, another piece of baby clothing she folded carefully into a drawer. Despite the hardships, she found small joys. The elderly woman who owned the bakery insisted on bringing her warm pastries every morning, claiming, "The little ones need strength." Her neighbor, a retired librarian, read stories through the wall when Emma couldn't sleep, his deep voice drifting through the thin plaster like a lullaby meant for all 4 of them. People she barely knew seemed to sense the bravery in her solitude. Their kindness formed a fragile net beneath her, catching her during moments she thought she might break. At night, when the world outside her window grew quiet, she would rest her hands on her belly and whisper to the 3 lives growing inside her. She told them about colors and music and sunlight. She told them about dreams she once had and dreams she was now forming for them. She never mentioned Austin. Not because she hated him, but because she couldn't bear the ache of imagining what might have been if he had chosen differently. As her due date approached, fear began weaving itself into her thoughts. She wondered how she would manage alone, how she would raise 3 daughters without family nearby, how she would explain one day why their father wasn't around. Yet every time doubt threatened to consume her, she reminded herself of the moment she heard 3 heartbeats. That sound had anchored her, had transformed her from a woman running from heartbreak into a mother running toward a future she didn't entirely understand but was willing to face. She wasn't the same Emma who had walked away from Austin's office. That woman had been hopeful, trusting, and far too willing to shrink herself to fit into someone else's expectations. This Emma, tired, scared, but resolute, was building a life on her own terms. She was creating a world for her daughters that didn't rely on anyone's permission or approval. And though she didn't know it yet, those choices would shape not only her future, but Austin's as well, in ways neither of them could have imagined. Emma went into labor on a rainy afternoon, the kind of day when the sky seemed determined to release every ounce of weight it had been carrying. She had been folding a tiny blanket when a sudden, sharp wave of pain cut through her, sending her gripping the back of a chair to steady herself. She had expected discomfort, maybe even fear, but nothing prepared her for the intensity that followed. Contractions came quickly, too quickly, forcing her to call the ambulance with trembling fingers. The paramedics arrived within minutes, guiding her gently but firmly as she tried to steady her breathing. The bakery owner rushed out into the street with an umbrella, shouting blessings and promises of warm bread when she returned, while Emma was being placed onto the stretcher, already losing control over her body. The hospital room was a blur of bright lights, moving figures, and urgent voices. The doctors explained the complications of delivering triplets, the risks, the likelihood of intervention. But Emma barely heard any of it. Her mind was singularly focused on the 3 tiny lives struggling to enter the world. She felt as though she were both inside her body and floating above it, watching herself grip the sheets, listening to her own gasps echo against the sterile walls. The pain arrived in relentless waves, but beneath it, she felt something deeper, an unyielding determination she never knew she possessed. Hours passed, though they felt like a single stretched moment without beginning or end. At last, the first cry pierced the air, a thin, wailing sound that made Emma sob with relief even as the doctors hurried to ensure the baby was breathing properly. A minute later, another cry joined the first, higher and more insistent, startling a laugh from Emma despite the agony tearing through her. And finally, after one final push that left her trembling and breathless, the third cry filled the room. It was softer, almost curious, as if the final little girl were trying to understand this new, bright world she had entered. When the nurses placed the babies in her arms, the exhaustion melted into awe. She stared at them, 3 tiny faces, 3 sets of soft dark hair, 3 pairs of tightly closed eyes, and felt a swell of emotion so powerful she feared it might break her. Their skin was warm against her chest, their breaths shallow but steady. She counted their fingers, their toes, traced the curves of their cheeks with a gentle fingertip, and whispered their names aloud for the first time. Lily, calm and sleepy, nestled her face against Emma's shoulder. Sky squirmed lightly, protesting the blanket that wrapped her. Aria blinked open for a fleeting second, revealing eyes that, even in that brief glimpse, reflected a startling, unmistakable shade of blue. Emma cried then, not from pain, but from gratitude, from the wonder of realizing that despite everything she had endured, she had created 3 perfect miracles. She kissed each tiny forehead, letting her tears fall freely, soaking into their hats. The nurse standing nearby placed a reassuring hand on Emma's shoulder, offering a soft smile. "You're stronger than you think," she said quietly, and Emma believed it for the first time. The hours following the birth were difficult. Emma drifted in and out of sleep, her body aching, her mind foggy from pain and overwhelming emotion. Nurses came and went, checking vitals, adjusting blankets, ensuring each baby was safe and stable. Lily was the smallest, requiring extra monitoring, and every time Emma looked over and saw her connected to a few additional wires, her heart clenched with worry. Sky slept most of the time, her tiny hands curled tightly into fists. Aria, on the other hand, seemed restless, stretching her arms with surprising energy for someone so small. Emma watched them with a sense of wonder, unable to reconcile how 3 entirely different personalities had emerged from her body in a single afternoon. As the night settled in and the bustle of the hospital quieted, Emma was finally alone with them. The room was dim, bathed in soft golden light from a single lamp. She tried to sit up straighter, determined to memorize every detail of her daughters' faces. She wrapped her arms around them, letting their warmth seep into her skin, grounding her in a way she hadn't felt since before the heartbreak that had driven her away from the life she once knew. She could not stop thinking about Austin then. She wondered what he would say if he saw them. She wondered if he would feel remorse, or if he would dismiss everything again with the same cold certainty. She knew it didn't matter in the practical sense, she would raise these girls with or without him. But there was a piece of her, wounded yet still tender, that longed for him to understand the magnitude of what he had turned away from. She imagined him holding Lily or trying to calm Sky's wails or watching Aria's bright eyes widen with curiosity. For a moment, she allowed herself to picture his astonished expression, the one he would wear if he realized just how much beauty had come from a decision he made with such detachment. But she pushed the thought away. These moments belonged to her and her daughters alone. She pressed her lips to the tops of their heads, inhaling their newborn scent, warm, sweet, impossibly pure, and let herself feel whole again. Despite the pain, the fear, the uncertainty of what lay ahead, she felt a profound sense of purpose settle over her. She wasn't simply beginning a new chapter, she was beginning an entirely new life, one built not on the fragile foundation of someone else's ambitions, but on the unshakable love she felt for the 3 tiny hearts sleeping against her chest. And as she closed her eyes, her last thought before drifting into an exhausted sleep was a promise, silent but fierce, that she would give these girls everything she had, even if she had to do it alone. The first months of motherhood passed in a blur of sleepless nights, burp cloths, warm bottles, and soft lullabies whispered through trembling lips. Emma quickly learned that caring for 3 infants at once was an all-consuming, relentless task that pushed her beyond physical and emotional limits she never knew existed. Each day began before dawn, often because Aria woke crying with her restless energy, setting off a chain reaction of tiny voices demanding attention. Emma would scoop them into her arms one by one, murmuring soothing words even when her own voice trembled from exhaustion. Some mornings she felt as if the world outside her apartment had vanished entirely, replaced by a universe made solely of feedings, diaper changes, and fighting to stay awake long enough to get through another hour. Yet even in her weakest moments, she felt a deep sense of purpose anchoring her, something stronger than fear, stronger than loneliness. She developed a routine that was more survival strategy than schedule. Lily needed gentler rocking and longer feeding time because she was small and easily tired. Sky ate quickly, fell asleep quickly, and often woke with a smile that spread across her tiny face like sunlight breaking through clouds. Aria was the most demanding, her cries louder, her curiosity sharper even as a newborn. Emma often found her staring at patterns on the wall or turning her head toward any new sound. The 3 of them together formed a rhythm, chaotic, unpredictable, but somehow theirs. Emma moved through it like a conductor trying to tame a symphony that refused to follow the sheet music. The financial strain began to weigh on her too. Medical bills stacked up, and diapers disappeared at an alarming rate. She worked whenever she could, sketching designs during the rare quiet moments when all 3 girls slept at the same time. Her laptop became an anchor on her kitchen table, surrounded by baby bottles, half-open crayons, and the quiet hum of a white noise machine she used to soothe the girls. She took freelance jobs tirelessly, pouring every ounce of her creativity into each project because those earnings meant another week of formula, another doctor's visit, another small necessity for the girls. There were nights when she cried silently while scrolling through her account balance, her tears falling onto her keyboard as she wondered how she would stretch each dollar far enough. But she also discovered unexpected pockets of support. The bakery owner downstairs checked on her almost daily, bringing her fresh bread and muffins, insisting she didn't need to pay. Her neighbor came over to help fold laundry or watch the girls for 10 minutes so Emma could shower, a small mercy that often felt life-saving. The town seemed to embrace her in a gentle, unspoken way, as if recognizing the quiet bravery with which she fought to keep herself and her daughters afloat. As the girls grew, their personalities bloomed even more. By the time they reached a few months old, Emma could distinguish their cries from across the room. Lily's was soft and pleading, Sky's had a melodic rise and fall, and Aria's was fierce and demanding. They reached for her with tiny fingers, touching her face, exploring her hair, tugging at the neckline of her shirt as if claiming her completely. Emma felt her heart stretch wider each day, filled to the brim with a love that often made her breath catch in her chest. She found herself laughing more, even when she was exhausted, because their smiles were contagious, their babbles irresistible, their presence grounding in a way nothing in her old life had ever been. And yet, despite her commitment to moving forward, there were moments when her mind drifted back to Austin. It always happened unexpectedly, when Sky giggled in a way that reminded Emma of his rare, soft chuckles, or when she noticed Aria's intense stare, so similar to the concentrated focus he used in meetings, or when Lily slept with her hands curled beneath her cheek exactly the way Austin had once rested on their couch after long workdays. Emma told herself it didn't matter. She told herself these similarities were illusions. But every so often, when the girls were particularly still and the world felt too quiet, she wondered how he would react if he saw them, if he would immediately recognize himself in their features, if he would regret what he had said. But time pushed her forward, months turning into a year. The girls learned to sit, then crawl, filling the small apartment with laughter, squeals, and chaos. Emma grew stronger too, learning patience she hadn't known she possessed, finding joy in small achievements, like the first time all three fell asleep at the same time, or when Lily clapped her hands for the first time, or when Sky babbled "Mama" in a voice that felt like a gift she had waited her whole life to receive. By the time the girls turned 2, they had become a tiny trio of personalities, spirited, warm, endlessly curious. Emma's life was far from easy, but it was full. The ache of her past had softened, replaced by a resilience she had earned through countless nights and countless quiet battles. She thought of Austin less frequently, and when she did, it no longer felt like a wound but a closed door. She believed she had moved on. What she didn't know was that across the city, Austin was living a life that looked perfect but felt increasingly hollow, and the door she believed was closed was, in reality, only waiting for the moment when everything would come crashing back into his world. Austin Reed's life had grown brighter on the outside and dimmer on the inside, like a mansion with every exterior light shining while the rooms within sat cold and empty. At 32, he had achieved more than most people dreamed of: private meetings with industry giants, glossy magazine features praising his leadership, and a penthouse overlooking the city skyline. Yet none of it silenced the dull ache that had begun to pulse beneath his ribs, a feeling he tried to categorize at first as fatigue or stress but gradually realized was something far more personal: the constant, unignorable sense that something important was missing. He didn't speak about it to anyone, not even to the colleagues who admired him or the women who occasionally accompanied him to events. They saw him as the polished, composed CEO he had always been, a man untouchable and unwavering. But behind closed doors, Austin felt every success hollowing out a little more space inside him. Nights were the worst, when the city lights sparkled against his windows like scattered diamonds while he sat alone at his kitchen counter eating meals he didn't taste. Nothing grounded him. Nothing warmed him. Nothing filled the silence. He tried to distract himself with work. He took on more projects, extended his hours, traveled constantly. During flights he stared out the window, pretending to admire the view while his mind wandered down paths he avoided during the day. He would see a woman with blonde hair pass by in an airport and feel a jolt of recognition before realizing it wasn't Emma. He would hear a child laugh in a restaurant and feel his chest tighten inexplicably, a pang he couldn't explain. He told himself it was nostalgia, a side effect of age, perhaps. But deep inside, he knew it was something much heavier, a consequence of choices he had made without understanding their weight. His friends noticed the shift too. At one dinner, his longtime colleague Marcus leaned back in his chair and studied him with concern. "You look tired," he said. "Not the kind of tired you fix with a vacation." Austin brushed it off with a dismissive shrug, but the comment stuck with him. He had grown skilled at masking his emotions, yet somehow the emptiness had begun leaking through the cracks. Every attempt to ignore it felt like pushing against a tide growing stronger each day. The most surprising part was how often his thoughts drifted to Emma, even after all these years. He remembered the way she used to look at him, with quiet admiration and trust. He remembered her laughter, the softness of her voice when she spoke about her dreams, the warmth she brought into every corner of his life. He had dismissed her so easily, convinced he was protecting his future, but now the memory of her leaving, her silence, her steady walk out the door, haunted him. He wondered what she was doing now. Whether she had healed. Whether she had forgotten him. Whether she had found someone who valued what he had failed to appreciate. What he never considered, not even once, was the possibility that he had left behind more than a broken relationship. He never imagined the existence of 3 small lives who looked just like him. That thought never entered his mind because he had been so certain, so absolute in his belief that a child was incompatible with his plans. Yet fate had a way of holding a mirror up to the choices people wished to erase. And without knowing why, Austin began to feel a subtle, persistent pull, as though life itself were guiding him towards something inevitable. It started with small moments. He found himself slowing down when passing families on the street, watching fathers lift children onto their shoulders or guide them across crosswalks. He caught himself lingering near cafes where young parents gathered with toddlers bouncing on their knees. Sometimes he imagined himself in those scenes, a startling, unfamiliar vision that made his throat tighten with longing he did not dare to name. One evening, after a long day of negotiations, Austin walked home instead of calling a driver. The night was cool, and the hum of the city felt strangely soothing. As he passed a small park, he heard a little girl squeal with laughter as she ran toward her father, her small arms outstretched. The man lifted her effortlessly, spinning her until she shrieked again. Austin stopped walking without realizing it. He watched them through the park's iron fence, feeling something unravel inside him. He wasn't sure whether it was regret or envy or simply the ache of realizing that the life he had built for himself might not be the life he truly wanted. When he finally returned to his penthouse, he sat in the dark living room, the only light coming from the distant glow of skyscrapers. The silence pressed heavily against him, amplifying every thought he had tried to bury. He wondered what Emma would say if she saw him now, hollowed out, successful, lonely. He wondered whether she ever thought of him or if he had become nothing more than a closed chapter she no longer read. He didn't know that Emma, struggling to keep up with 3 strong-willed toddlers, was asleep on her couch at that very moment, her daughters sprawled across her chest like tiny, determined stars. He didn't know that their lives were on the verge of colliding again in a moment that neither of them anticipated. What he did know, for the first time in years, was that something had to change. He couldn't explain the growing restlessness, the tug beneath his ribs, the sense that his neatly constructed life was missing a heartbeat he desperately needed to find. And though he didn't understand it yet, that invisible pull was guiding him toward a cafe terrace where 3 little girls would soon look up at him with eyes uncannily similar to his own, eyes that would shatter everything he thought he knew about his past, his future, and himself. Austin had not planned to stop at the small cafe that afternoon. He had been walking aimlessly after a morning filled with back-to-back meetings that left him irritated and strangely hollow, as if every conversation had drained something vital from him. His assistant had reminded him 3 times about the documents he needed to sign before evening, but he ignored the messages and kept walking, driven by an impulse he didn't fully understand. The city buzzed around him, people weaving in and out of shops and restaurants, yet he felt disconnected from it all. When he finally slowed near a quiet cafe with a sunlit terrace, he didn't think, he simply stepped inside, drawn by the warmth, the smell of brewed coffee, and a faint pull in his chest that felt almost like fate tightening a thread. He asked for a table on the terrace, wanting fresh air more than food. The waitress pointed him toward a corner spot near the railing, and he walked over without looking at the other guests. He removed his jacket, set down his phone, and exhaled deeply. It was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon, a brief moment to breathe before returning to the corporate world that demanded every piece of him. Yet something in the atmosphere felt charged, as if the air itself were holding its breath. He sensed it without knowing why, the peculiar stillness before a storm he never saw coming. Then he heard it. A giggle, high and bright, followed by another softer one, and then a tiny voice asking, "Mama, look." It wasn't unusual to hear children in a cafe, but this sound gripped him with startling force. Something in that giggle, its melody, its purity, echoed through him in a way that made his heart lurch. He turned his head instinctively, more curious than concerned. That was when he saw them. At a table only a few steps away sat a woman with golden hair pulled back loosely, tendrils falling around her face as she leaned over to wipe crumbs from a toddler's cheeks. Her posture was familiar. Her profile was familiar. Her presence, soft, steady, unmistakable, hit him like a punch to the chest. For a second he genuinely thought he was imagining her, that his restless thoughts had finally spilled into reality. But it wasn't a hallucination. It was Emma. She looked different, older, stronger, more tired in the way mothers often looked, but more beautiful than he ever remembered. Her blue eyes carried a depth he had never taken the time to understand, and her smile, faint but warm, softened her entire face. He stared at her, frozen, unable to speak or breathe or think. And then his gaze shifted. Next to her sat 3 little girls. 3 toddlers. 3 identical faces. 3 sets of soft, dark hair. 3 pairs of bright blue eyes. Blue eyes he knew. Blue eyes he had seen in the mirror every morning since he was a child. They were laughing among themselves, tapping crumbs on the table, reaching for Emma, babbling excitedly. One of them, small and gentle, held a stuffed rabbit by its ear. Another drummed on the table with a spoon. The third swung her legs under the chair, humming tunelessly. Austin felt the world tilt violently. For a moment, all sound disappeared. He couldn't hear the cafe chatter, the traffic, the clinking of cups. All he could hear was the rapid thundering of his own pulse. His mouth went dry. His fingers trembled against the table. He felt something unravel inside him, shock first, disbelief second, and then a raw, overwhelming ache he had no words for. He stood without thinking. His chair scraped against the floor loudly, causing Emma to look up. Their eyes met across the terrace, and time collapsed. He saw her freeze, saw her breath hitch, saw the recognition flood her face. A complicated mixture of fear, sadness, and something softer flickered in her eyes, and it shattered him because she looked like someone who had prepared her whole life for this moment yet still dreaded it. Austin walked toward her slowly, each step heavier than the last. He reached the edge of her table, staring not at her but at the 3 little girls who had stopped playing to gaze up at him with innocent curiosity. One of them tilted her head, examining him as though sensing something familiar. Another reached for Emma's sleeve, whispering, "Mama." He opened his mouth, but his voice broke before words formed. Emma swallowed hard, bracing herself. The silence between them stretched thin, trembling under the weight of 5 lost years and 3 tiny truths sitting before him. Finally he managed to whisper, barely audible, "Emma, are they?" Emma didn't speak immediately. She looked at her daughters, then back at him, her eyes soft with apology and pain and unspoken history. When she finally nodded, it was small, almost fragile, but undeniable. Austin's breath collapsed out of him. His knees felt weak. He reached for the back of a chair to steady himself. He stared at the girls again as emotions crashed over him, shock, wonder, guilt, awe, grief, longing. He felt tears burn unexpectedly at the corners of his eyes, something he hadn't allowed himself in years. 3 daughters. His daughters. Living their lives without him. And sitting across from him was the woman he had pushed away with one careless, devastating sentence that had shaped all of their futures. He had come to the cafe to escape his own emptiness. Instead, he found the 3 lives who had filled Emma's world, and the 3 pieces of his heart he never knew were missing. Austin stood there longer than he realized, his hand gripping the back of the empty chair as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. His entire body felt unsteady, flooded by emotions so fierce he couldn't separate one from another. Shock tangled with regret, awe collided with fear, and beneath it all pulsed a sharp, visceral ache, an ache that told him he had just collided with the truth he had been unknowingly searching for these past 2 years. The 3 little girls continued staring at him without alarm, their heads tilted in identical curiosity, their round blue eyes blinking slowly as though examining a puzzle they had never seen before but felt strangely familiar with. Emma cleared her throat softly, pulling him back to the moment. She shifted in her seat, placing a gentle hand on the table near the girls, an instinctive gesture of protection. She didn't look angry, but she didn't look welcoming either. Her expression was complicated, guarded, cautious, laced with sorrow and strength that seemed carved into her through 2 years of motherhood without him. Austin's chest tightened painfully when he realized she had raised 3 children alone, endured every sleepless night and every fearful moment without support, without comfort, without a partner. Without him. He pulled out the vacant chair slowly, almost hesitantly, as though asking permission without words. Emma gave the slightest nod, and he sat down. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The girls returned to their activities, Sky tapping her spoon against a cup, Lily hugging her stuffed rabbit, and Arya reaching for a sugar packet with determined little fingers. Their presence filled the space between the adults like bright, living proof of everything he had missed. When Austin finally found his voice, it sounded rough, thick, almost foreign. "I didn't know," he said quietly. "Emma. I didn't know." She looked at him steadily, her eyes softening just a fraction. "I didn't tell you," she admitted. "I couldn't. Not after what you said. Not after how quickly you dismissed the idea of a child." Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "I needed to protect them. And myself." He swallowed hard, guilt rising like a tide inside him. "I was wrong," he whispered. "I was so unbelievably wrong." He looked at the girls again, letting the truth of them, 3 perfect, living pieces of him, sink deep into his soul. "I don't know what I thought I was doing back then. I don't know why I believed saying those words would make my life easier. All I've felt since then is..." He paused, searching for the right word. "Empty." Emma didn't respond immediately. She studied him with the kind of measured care one gives a wounded animal, sympathy tempered by caution. "Life became very real for me very fast," she said. "There wasn't time to dwell on what we lost. I had to focus on what I was given." She glanced at the girls, her face softening. "They saved me from breaking completely." The waitress arrived momentarily to refill their water glasses, and the girls greeted her with cheerful babbles. The interruption gave Austin a moment to gather himself, to breathe, to observe. He felt like an outsider looking through a window into a world that should have been his but had grown without him. Yet instead of jealousy or resentment, he felt an overwhelming desire to be part of it, a desire so strong it frightened him. When the waitress left, Sky leaned forward and tapped Austin's wrist with her small hand. "Hi," she chirped, her tiny voice bubbling with confidence. Lily followed her twin's example with a shy smile, while Arya stretched out her arms toward him, intrigued by the watch on his wrist. Austin's breath hitched at their innocence, at how easily they accepted him without knowing who he was. His eyes stung as he gently turned his wrist so Arya could tap the watch face with her finger. "Hi," he whispered back, his voice cracking. Emma watched the interaction silently, and he saw something shift in her expression, something softening, loosening, a quiet thread of conflict tugging at her. She wasn't ready to trust him. She had every right not to. But she wasn't shutting him out either. "I want to be in their lives," Austin said finally, his voice trembling with emotion he no longer tried to hide. "I don't know what that looks like yet. I don't know how to earn it. But I want to try. I want to learn. I want to show up. Emma inhaled slowly, weighing his words. Her gaze drifted to the girls, then back to him. This isn't something you decide for a day, she said softly. They're not an impulse. They're not a plan. They're people. They're my entire world. I know, he whispered. And I'm asking, begging, for a chance to prove they can be my world too. A long silence followed, filled with children's laughter, clinking dishes, and the faint breeze brushing past them. Austin didn't rush her. He didn't push. He simply waited, sitting with his heart open and vulnerable for the first time in years. Finally, Emma spoke. We'll start slow, she said, her voice quiet but steady. They don't know who you are yet. You'll need to earn their trust. And mine. Austin nodded, relief flooding him like warmth spreading through his cold, hollow chest. Whatever it takes, he said. I'll do anything. Emma looked at him, studying his face as though searching for the truth behind his words. And in that moment, she saw it, the sincerity, the regret, the yearning, and the unmistakable love blooming unexpectedly in his eyes as he watched the girls. It was not forgiveness yet. But it was the first fragile step towards something new. Something none of them had expected. Something that would change all of their lives. Over the following weeks, Austin's life changed in ways he could never have predicted. The transition wasn't smooth or simple, it unfolded slowly, like dawn creeping over the horizon, touching everything with hesitant light before fully illuminating the landscape. He rearranged his schedule so he could visit Emma and the girls regularly, trimming away meetings that once felt indispensable, declining events that would have impressed investors but no longer held meaning. His assistant was baffled by the sudden shift in priorities, but Austin didn't bother explaining. He didn't owe the world a justification for wanting to know his own children. His first visits were awkward. The girls approached him like a new toy, curiously, cautiously, and each in her own way. Lily remained shy at first, studying him from behind Emma's leg before inching closer each time he came. Skye was bold and talkative, climbing into his lap even before he figured out how to balance her small body. Arya treated him like a project, inspecting his watch, his cufflinks, his tie, and once even his briefcase with the intensity of a tiny investigator. He found himself laughing more than he had in years, real, unforced laughter that burst from him unexpectedly, loosening something inside his chest every time it happened. Emma watched all of it from a careful distance at first, observing him with quiet scrutiny. She never interfered, but she also never let down her guard fully, always hovering close enough to step in if needed. Austin respected that. He understood that every step forward had to be earned. He didn't push her for conversations about the past. He didn't demand forgiveness. He simply showed up, consistently, thoughtfully, wholeheartedly. He learned how to braid Lily's hair, though it took him 5 failed attempts before he managed a lopsided braid that held together for at least 5 minutes. He learned that Skye loved singing more than anything and would belt out improvised songs that made no sense but filled the room with brightness. He learned that Arya had a mischievous streak, constantly trying to climb onto furniture she had no business climbing onto, forcing him to develop reflexes he didn't know he needed. He learned to carry all 3 of them at once, one on his hip, one hanging onto his shoulder, and one sitting on his opposite arm, and he wore the bruises from their tiny shoes like badges of honor. He learned the difference between their cries. He learned what foods they liked and which ones they dramatically spit out. He learned the softness of their morning cuddles and the chaos of their evening energy bursts. And each new discovery carved deeper roots into his heart, binding him to them in a way that felt both terrifying and astonishingly natural. Emma began to change too. At first, she remained neutral around him, maintaining polite conversations and setting clear boundaries. But as she watched him kneel on the floor for an hour building towers of blocks only for the girls to knock them down, or as she saw him arrive exhausted from work but still willing to sit through tantrums and spills, something inside her shifted. The wall she had built around herself didn't crumble instantly, it cracked slowly, letting in thin streams of possibility. One evening, after the girls had finally fallen asleep in a heap of blankets, Emma and Austin sat on the sofa in her living room, both sipping tea in comfortable silence. The air felt unusually soft, filled with a gentle peace that neither of them had planned. Emma glanced at him and said quietly, "They really like you." He looked down at his cup, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't expect that," he admitted. "After everything. I didn't think I deserved it." She studied him with thoughtful eyes. "Children don't judge the past," she said. "They only feel what's in front of them." He nodded slowly, absorbing her words like a bomb settling over old wounds. It was the closest they had come to discussing the hurt between them, and it felt strangely healing. Weeks turned into months, and their interactions deepened naturally. Austin invited them to parks, to bookstores, to quiet family-friendly restaurants. Emma came too, at first out of necessity, then out of comfort. Watching him became less of a protective duty and more of a quiet pleasure, though she wasn't ready to name it yet. The turning point came on a winter afternoon when the girls built their first snowman outside Emma's apartment. Lily insisted the snowman needed a scarf, Sky demanded it needed a song, and Aria tried to give it Austin's work badge. Emma and Austin stood side by side, laughing breathlessly as they scrambled to keep the girls from dismantling their creation faster than they built it. At one point, Emma slipped on the ice, and Austin caught her instinctively. He didn't let go immediately. She didn't pull away. Their eyes met, breath mingling in the cold air, and for the first time since their reunion, the 3-year-old ache between them softened into something warm and quietly hopeful. But it wasn't a grand confession or dramatic moment that solidified their new beginning. It happened one ordinary evening when Austin arrived with takeout, juggling paper bags while 2 girls clung to his legs. Emma opened the door with a tired smile, her hair messy, her shirt stained with juice, but she looked more beautiful to him than she ever had. He stepped inside, the girls squealing around him, and Emma watched the scene unfold with a heart fuller than she expected. She realized then that he wasn't trying to fix the past. He wasn't running from responsibility or chasing redemption. He was simply there, present, steady, learning, loving. And she realized she wanted him there. Later that night, after the girls fell asleep and he prepared to leave, Emma walked him to the door. Her voice trembled only slightly when she said, "Austin, you're becoming part of our lives. Really part of it." He looked at her with an expression she had never seen from him before, vulnerable, grateful, unsure but hopeful. "I want to be," he said. "For them. And, for you." Her breath caught. The words hung between them, fragile but glowing. Emma didn't promise anything that night. She didn't need to. She simply reached out and squeezed his hand, an invitation, a beginning, a quiet acceptance that their story wasn't broken beyond repair. In the months that followed, their connection deepened, no longer rooted in fear or regret but in shared moments, shared responsibilities, and the growing realization that the family they were building, together this time, was something they both needed more than they had ever understood. And for the first time in a long time, Austin no longer felt empty. Emma no longer felt alone. The girls no longer lived with only half of their story. They were something new, reshaped, rebuilt, imperfect, and extraordinary. A family created by chance, separated by fear, and reunited by a love that arrived late but still right on time.